Donald Trump has spent most of his time and energy railing against special counsel Robert Mueller and his Russia investigation. But the greatest legal threat to Trump's presidency could actually come from the Southern District of New York. That's where Trump's longtime lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to violating campaign finance laws and implicated Donald Trump himself in those crimes. It's also where prosecutors granted immunity to this man, Allen Weisselberg, the chief financial officer for the Trump Organization, who, quote, knows where the financial bodies are buried. Also granting immunity in the case are two of Trump's associates from a media company that owns the tabloid The National Enquirer. Former prosecutors tell The Atlantic that the Southern District is building its case like it would build a case of organized crime. Quote, this is a classic move in investigations of a criminal organization, said Patrick Cotter, a former federal prosecutor who was part of the team that convicted the Gambino family boss, John Gotti. They're moving up the ladder. Peripheral characters are given immunity. Witnesses testify, but they're ultimately keeping their eye on the prize. The prize. The Washington Post reports that Trump's wall of secrecy, the work of a lifetime, is starting to crack. In coming months, certain cases could force Trump's company to open its books about foreign government customers or compel the president to testify about his relationships with women. Trump legal defender Alan Dershowitz warned the president and his legal team that the Mueller investigation should not be their priority.
Perhaps the special counsel is the least of the threats the president faces right now.
Right.
You've got the Southern District, you've got the New York Attorney General, you've got the Manhattan District Attorney. Where's the greatest threat?
Well, I've said that right from the beginning, because I think he has constitutional defenses to the investigation being conducted by Mueller. But there are no constitutional defenses to what the Southern District is investigating. So I think the Southern District is the greatest threat.
Joining us now is Natasha Bertrand, the staff writer at The Atlantic. Having trouble speaking tonight. At The Atlantic, covering national security and the intelligence community. She wrote the article about the Southern District. She's also an MSNBC contributor. Mimi Rocah is back with us. Welcome to both of you. Natasha, what did Dershowitz mean when he said the president has constitutional defenses against the Mueller investigation, but not against the Southern District of New York?
Well, I think you've put me in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with Alan Dershowitz on something, Ali. So I think that the point he was trying to make is that the president could order Rod Rosenstein essentially to fire Bob Mueller at any point. Of course, Rosenstein could refuse to do that, and there are certain limits to there are issues related to the president's executive authority that could hinder the Mueller investigation in a way that the Southern District of New York may not be affected by. So, for example, if Bob Mueller was fired, his work would potentially continue, but you can't really end the investigations that are being carried out by prosecutors in the Southern District of New York by firing one person. I mean, this is something that's out of the president's control, really, and I think that's why he's so terrified at the moment. If you speak to people close to him and people around the administration, they say that he's really he feels like he's being backed into a corner, and it's also because he knows that this is getting into the heart of his finances, the heart of the Trump Organization, of course, which is
he warned
based in
Mueller
Manhattan.
not to get involved in, but the Southern District has no warning from the president, and he needs to heed no warning from the president.
Right. And it's also important to remember that the president really has never had to face consequences for anything. And so this is kind of the system striking back in a way that I don't think he expected it to. Now, of course, I don't think that means that the Mueller investigation poses no threat to the president.
Yeah.
Of course, he is investigating whether the president obstructed justice, which is a serious danger. And of course, we also don't know what Mueller has in terms of a potential conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. You know, why has Michael Flynn's sentencing been delayed so much? What do we know about Roger Stone and WikiLeaks? So these are questions that will need to be answered. But right now, the more immediate threat is being posed by the Southern District.
Right. It would be overstating it to say that the Mueller investigation is not a threat to the president. But Mimi, you are formerly of the Southern District of New York. I think for a lot of us, again, who aren't lawyers, we're not clear on the distinction. But it does seem from what Natasha is saying that the Southern District doesn't have to run scared of anything Donald Trump can do. The only thing he can do is pardon somebody that gets a conviction from the Southern District.
That's generally true. U.S. attorneys' offices in general run their investigations independently, certainly of the president, but also even independently of the attorney general of the Department of Justice. There are certain things that U.S. attorneys' offices like the Southern District need to go to what we call main justice,
right.
The attorney general and offices within the Department of Justice in Washington to get permission for certain kinds of charges, tax charges. Now, if you recall at Michael Cohen's plea, there was, I believe, a tax agent, an agent from the IRS at his plea, which means that they're already involved. So that permission, has already been sought because we know that Michael Cohen pled guilty to tax charges. So, I think the point is that it would be so unusual for Trump in some way to impose limits on the Southern District investigation. And the Southern District is not just any U.S. attorney's office.
Right.
It is, as I think Natasha mentioned in her article, sort of sometimes, derisively called the Sovereign District
right.
of New York. But it's for a reason, and it's because the Southern District has always really maintained its independence, even more than other offices. And that's going to come in handy here. In this investigation as it grows.
And by the way, there's also the New York Attorney General and the Manhattan District Attorney who are yet farther removed from influences that Donald Trump can have over them.
Right. I mean, they have absolutely, he has no power over them, other than, I guess, political influence, but nothing
Tweets and
official.
saying bad things about them.
Right, exactly.
All right, good discussion. Natasha, I do want to ask you about this business about where there could be liability for Donald Trump's kids when it comes to these other investigations.
Of course. Well, Trump's three children, Ivanka, Donald Trump Jr., and Eric Trump, they were all executive vice presidents at the Trump Organization. So if there was any wrongdoing in terms of the financial dealings in the Trump Organization's history, then that could open them up to some legal exposure. But of course, what the New York Attorney General is investigating regarding the Trump Foundation, that could be even more problematic for Trump's kids, because as we've seen, there is evidence that they used their charity to fund certain aspects of the Trump campaign.
All right. Thanks to both of you, Mimi Rocha and Natasha Bertrand.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.